This is a lecture from Open Tuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
Okay, this lecture is on supplier statements reconciliations. And what we're talking about here is it's very common for suppliers at regular intervals to send us a statement showing how much they think we owe them. Standardly, you'll get a statement listing everything they've invoiced us, all the cash we've paid them, and at the end, the amount we're owing them. And it is important when we receive a statement that we do check on our computers that it agrees with what we think we owe them. The computer obviously kept a record of how much is owed to each supplier, and we need to check. Does it agree? If it does, fine. And if the money's due, we'll pay it. If it doesn't agree, then we need to find out what's gone wrong. And a little bit similar to bank reconciliation statements. When we get the supplier statement, if the two don't agree, there are potentially three reasons. One is that we could have made a mistake. The supplier sent us an invoice for 100. We typed in 10. We think we owe 10. The supplier tells us we owe 100. Well, we've made a mistake. And obviously, if we've made any mistakes, we need to correct them. A second reason, of course, is the supplier made a mistake. In exactly the same way, they may have sent us an invoice for 100, which is correct, and we've entered 100 and are correct. But they've typed into their system 1,000, and they think we owe them 1,000. Well, it's their mistake. And of course, if we find any mistakes made by them, we need to tell them and get them to correct it. Finally, though, the reason why, even if everything we've done is perfect, everything they've done is perfect, the reason why there can still be a difference is what we call timing differences. And the reason these can occur is, suppose the supplier sent us goods a few days ago for 1,000. And so they've sent the goods, they've prepared an invoice, and they think we owe 1,000. But we haven't yet received the goods, and we haven't yet received the invoice. You know, they sent the invoice in the post. And so we are going to receive the goods, we are going to receive an invoice, but it's just it hasn't yet arrived. So the moment our records say we owe them nothing, their records, the statement says we owe them 1,000. Well, they're not wrong. We're not wrong. We haven't had the invoice yet. We haven't had the goods. In a few days' time, when I get the invoice, we'll enter it and then we'll agree. But as of today, we don't agree because this invoice is in the post. Or equally, we could have sent them cash yesterday. We think we've paid everything and don't owe them anything. They haven't yet received the cash. They will enter it when they receive it, but as of today, they've not. Oh, the date they sent us the statement, they haven't received the cash. They still show us as owing money. Now, although the first two we either correct or tell the supplier to correct, the timing difference, well, a bit like we had with bank reconciliations, nobody's wrong. We're not going to change anything, but we need to make sure that we can explain the difference. If we can't explain the difference, because invoice in the post or whatever, if we can't explain the difference, then we have a problem. There must be mistakes, and we'd better find out where they are. So here's a tiny example. As always, we seem to be stuck here. There we are. As always, I hope you've got the notes in front of you, but look at example 1. On 4th of July, we received a statement from one of our suppliers dated 30th of June. Obviously, it's been in the post. And it shows us as owing them a total of 800. So the supplier as on 4th of July, they reckon we owe them 800. Our payables account for this supplier shows a balance of only 100 at the 30th of June. So why don't they agree? Now in practice, I can't spell supplier. There we go. In practice, we'd have to go through everything and find out why they didn't agree. But here, and in the exam, we're told. On investigation, we discover the following. By mistake, an invoice received for 500 has been recorded by us as being for 50. So it's our mistake. And so what should the balance be? We are going to have to correct it, of course. And what are we going to do? We only recorded 50. It should have been 500, so we'll debit purchases with the extra 450. And we'll credit payables with the extra 450. So our balance, our corrected balance, do you agree with me? We show a balance at the moment in our records of 100. However, we've recorded an invoice of 500. We'd only recorded 50. So we need to add on an extra 450. So, no mention of any mistakes by the supplier. No mention of, we have corrected in our records, and so we should be able to reconcile or explain the remaining difference. And what is it? There is a timing difference. B. The statement shows a supplier as having sent us an invoice for 250 on the 29th of June. We didn't receive the invoice until the 3rd of July, and we entered it on the 3rd of July. So yeah, nobody's made an error. The supplier did send an invoice before the 30th of June, and then have recorded it. It's included in the 800. We haven't received it, so we haven't done anything wrong. We'll record it when we do receive it. But at the moment, that's why the two are different. And so, how do we explain? Well, less invoice in the post. What was it? 250? And it works. And there we are. And let me stress again, as I did earlier, that's correct, the 800. Supplier is not going to make any changes. The 550 is now correct. We've made a mistake, we correct it. And so at that stage, supplier's correct, we're correct. We know the reason for the difference, we can explain it, we can reconcile it. There is the reason for the difference, and we're happy. Now, in practice, things work differently. What would happen is we'd look at the supplier statement, we'd say, we haven't had that invoice yet, it's in the post, fine. Take it off, 550, and we'd say, our balance only shows 100. Well, so why is it 550? Well, then we'd have to go back and check everything. We'd find our mistake and we correct it. But there we are. Okay, now you will see in the same chapter, I've mentioned 3 specific items which rather fit in here, but aren't specifically to do with this reconciliation. But 3 special entries that can occur affecting suppliers. And well, I think all of them, when I explain, are pretty obvious. But the first is returns. Clearly, there stand to be times when we buy goods from a supplier and then for some reason or another return them, either because the goods are faulty or because we decide we don't need them or whatever. So, how are we going to record it? Well, little example. Suppose we buy goods on credit for 500 from Mr. X. What do we do when we buy on credit? We debit purchases. We credit Mr. X. A week later, we return half the goods and he accepts the return. I say he accepts, I mean, you can't just keep buying stuff and keep returning it for no reason. But he's accepted it, that either we didn't need that many or half the goods were faulty return, but he has agreed to accept them. And what are we going to do? Well, surely, if we've returned half the goods, that's 250, debit Mr. X with 250, and we only owe 250. And where do you think the double entry will be? Actually, it's a choice. We can either simply debit Mr. X and credit purchases, the returns, and so the net amount is 250. Alternatively, you can open it, if it happens a lot of times, you can open a new account called purchase returns, but on the statement of profit or loss, we still show purchases less returns. So the net purchase is 250. We owe Mr. X 250. So I think that's an easy one, a pretty obvious one. And although I'm not going to illustrate, as I've written, it's just exactly the same sort of entry if a customer returns goods to us. The next one, discounts. Now, there are 2 types or 2 reasons why a supplier might give us a discount. One reason we call a trade discount. And what a trade discount is, maybe we're a regular customer, we buy big amounts, and so the supplier agrees that we'll always have a discount of 10% on the normal price. So whereas normally they're charging 1,000, because we're a big customer, they'll only charge us 900. Well, there, no problem at all. The invoice will show the amount after subtracting our trade discount, and we enter the amount on the invoice. So although the goods may have, the normal price may be 1,000, if because of the discount we only get charged 900, and that's what the invoice says, fine, debit purchases, credit supplier 900, no problem. However, slightly different, well, a lot different in fact, and be more careful about is what we call a settlement discount. And what this is where we're offered a discount provided we pay quickly. Obviously, suppliers always want you to pay fast. They want the money quick. And to try and persuade you to pay quickly, they offer you a discount if you pay quickly. So look at the example. These are discounts we receive as suppliers or give to customers if and only if payment is made within a specified time period. Suppose we buy goods for £1,000 on credit from Mr. Y, and he offers us a 5% discount if we pay the invoice within 1 month. So, if we pay within a month, we will pay 5% less. If we don't pay within a month, we'll have to pay the full amount. So we only get the discount if we pay within the month. Well, what are we going to do? We get the invoice for £1,000. And of course, the day we receive the invoice, we don't yet know whether we're going to pay on time or not. So when we get the invoice, debit purchases, credit the supplier with the full amount of £1,000. Mr. Y. So that's the entry when we get the invoice. Now, if we don't pay within the month, we'll pay the full £1,000. Debit cash, credit Mr. Y £1,000. End of story. However, we do pay within a month and we only pay £9.50. So as always, when we make the payment, credit cash, debit Mr. Y with £9.50. But of course, we can't leave it there. We can't leave it there showing us as still owing 50. We're not owing 50 because we got the discount. And so we need to remove that 50. We debit Mr. Y with 50, and of course the account's now clear. And where are we going to credit? Well, we're not going to credit purchases because it's not as though we bought the goods themselves any cheaper. We still bought $1,000 worth of goods. We open a new account called Discounts Received. So debit Mr. Y 50, credit discount received 50. And that 50 will appear on the statement of profit or loss as extra income. It'll appear separately. The purchases are still recorded as having cost us £1,000. That discount we've received will appear as other income on the statement of profit or loss. Okay, finally, the third, oh dear, contra entries. Now this is a very, very special little entry. And so watch very carefully. It's obviously not in the note itself. Suppose I sell goods to Mr. Z for 500. So Mr. Z's a customer. We sell goods, we debit Mr. Z 500. No problem, that's what we did ages ago, as we always do when we sell goods to a customer. Suppose, though, we also buy goods from the same person for 1,000. Now, he's a supplier. And what do we do when we buy goods from a supplier? We debit purchases. We credit the supplier. Let's say 900, not 500, 900. Now, of course, it's not very common, but it does happen that you buy goods from somebody, here Mr. Z, and you also sell goods to the same person. Now, we could carry on as though nothing happened. You know, maybe later Mr. Z pays us the money, the 500, debit, cash, credit Mr. Z. We pay Mr. Z 900, credit, cash, debit Mr. Z. But since it's the same person, we might say, well, it's a bit silly to pay 900 and for him to then pay us 500. Why don't we just make a phone call and say, well, we owe you 9, you owe us 5. How about we just pay you 400, the difference? No problem. Credit, cash, debit Mr. Z, 400. That's what we always do when we pay a supplier. However, we can't leave it like that, clearly, because if we leave it like that, the danger is somebody forgets and next week we ring Mr. Z and demand the 500. Or a week later, somebody else, the person who pays suppliers, looks at that and say, oh, we owe 500, and pays them 500. So although this doesn't happen very often, I hope you accept it can happen. And when it does happen, we need to sort it out. Because we've agreed to just pay the difference. We don't owe him anything. He doesn't owe us anything. And what do you think we do? Well, surely, to clear it, we'll debit Mr. Z 500, because we've agreed we don't owe him anything. And we'll credit Mr. Z, the customer. This is the customer. This is the supplier. We'll credit Mr. Z 500, and he doesn't owe us anything. And it all works beautifully. Now I say again, it obviously doesn't happen that often. Most of our customers are completely different people than most of our suppliers. And even if it does happen, we might do the normal thing. We might pay him the 500, he might pay us the 900. But you can see the logic that we might well have a phone call with them and agree that we'll just pay the difference. And if we do need this entry. We can't leave a balance of 500 on both accounts. Now that entry has a name. It's called a Contra entry. Because it's really just almost a correcting entry, cancelling two balances. Out of interest, it does have a symbol, a C with a line through it. Certainly when we used to do things manually. But that's not really relevant now for the Excel. But that's all it is. It's cancelling a debit against a credit, cancelling an amount owed by a customer with an amount owing to the same customer. Now, I better just mention, some of you will be thinking, oh, could it be the other way around? Well, the answer is no. It's always that way round. We always debit the supplier and credit the customers. And just to prove it to you, suppose that the amounts were the other way around, that Mr. Z, they owed us 2,000. That's the customer. And the same person is a supplier, and we owe him 800. So this time he owes us more than we owe him. But again, rather than us send him 2,000, us send him 800 and him send us 2,000, we agree that he'll just pay the difference. He pays us the difference of 1,200. Well, what's a double entry when you get 1,200 from a customer? Debit cash, credit the customer, 1,200. And we've agreed that that's all we'll do. But yet again, we can't leave it like that. We can't leave us as owing him 800 and him as owing us 800. Be silly. And so how do we cancel them? We credit the customer 800, debit the supplier 800. The contra entry. And there we are. The customer's clear, the supplier's clear. We're happy. Okay, well, I hope that makes sense. I'll just summarise, and there's absolutely no argument. The contra entry, you debit the supplier the payable, you credit the customer the receivable. Always the same, and I still can't spell supplier. I keep missing the L out. Well, there it is. But it's always the same. We owe the supplier less, customer owes us less. It doesn't matter who was owing more to who. And that, the cash, either we pay them the balance or they pay us the balance. But there we are.